So this is a pretty different video to what I usually make, although I don't really know what I even make anymore. But anyway, I'm a huge fan of the Portal series. Portal 1 and 2 are easily some of my favorite games of all time, and for a while that's all the Portal I needed. But recently, after replaying them a few times, I finally decided to start checking out some of the big mods for the game. I heard a lot of good things about them, and the one I knew the most about was, of course, Portal Reloaded. But I haven't finished that game because it's too hard for me. Before that, I got Portal Revolution, a fan-made game for Portal 2 that has been out for some time now. I was especially interested since a lot of people have dubbed it Portal 3, so I decided to play it. I left a pretty nasty Steam review, but I decided to replay it just to see if anything changed for me since this mod was so well received, and I mean it has so many positive reviews. And I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't, just having a skill issue or it was because I was tired or anything. So, after replaying it, I bring to you my review for the Portal 2 mod, Portal Revolution. As a disclaimer, I am no way some sort of professional game critic. I just like Portal, and I want to express my thoughts on the game in a way that my Steam review didn't really do it, and it's just kind of a video that I wanted to make. So, take what I say with a grain of salt. And do remember that these are not my opinions, actually. This is fact. And anything I say that I disagree with you on, if you played the game, is an attack on your character and the developer as people, and you should feel bad because if I disagree with you, that means you're wrong. Okay, you're obviously not. If you enjoy the game, great. If you don't, that's fine. Obviously, I have a lot of respect for the developers who are way more talented than I am. All I ask is that you just listen to what I have to say, and if the developers are listening, hey, maybe, if you're ever planning on doing another one of these, maybe take somewhat of what I say into account. And there will be spoilers, by the way, for Portal 1, Portal 2, and Portal Revolution. Let's start with the good. So, to start, the game looks great. It stays very faithful to the Portal 2 aesthetic while also having some of its own charm, primarily with the way lighting is used. This is especially true when you reach the surface areas, and the natural lighting really shakes things up from the interior lighting of the regular test chambers. And speaking of lighting, portals have their own light source which even reflects on the player model, which I think looks pretty neat. Although I noticed this at first, but then I realized that it never happened again. It also didn't happen with the new portal gun you got. And so I'm not really sure if that was intentional or not, but it was odd. But anyway, complaints are for later. Next, the idea of going up to the surface to do tests is really neat, and it changes up the scenery, again, in a pretty interesting way. It has an entirely different atmosphere that, personally, I really enjoy. The spire itself is a pretty cool location, which I think fits pretty well into the Aperture Science lore. It doesn't change too many things, and you could easily play Portal 1 and 2, and if it was there or if it wasn't, it really wouldn't make too much of a difference. Speaking of which, the first half of this game is easily the strongest, though I wouldn't exactly say it's anywhere up to par with Portal 1 or 2. It feels more fresh than the later parts, and the mystery around Sterling makes for some decent interest at first. The menu also includes an exit to desktop option, which I like. It saves a bit more time from having to exit multiple times like you would at Portal or Portal 2. I also do like how the new, I guess old Portal gun looks. The blue and red coloring is kind of weird since they're not opposites, but I still quite enjoy how they look. I'm also glad we go into a different time of Aperture, instead of just returning to the 60s and 70s portion from Portal 2 again and retreading all that. Also, I mean, this is a free multi-hour experience for Portal, and even though I'm about to express many complaints and nitpicks about this mod that I have, I do think it's pretty amazing that this experience is able to be played for free, and a lot of people really enjoy it. So even despite its faults, it still is a pretty good deal if you're really itching for more Portal content and you think it looks good, and you've already played Portal Stories Mail and Portal Reloaded. Now to the nitpicks. These are things which aren't huge issues, and they're more personal gripes than anything. It probably won't affect most people's enjoyment of the pod, but they're just kind of things that bothered me and that I noticed. To start, the character model looks a little off. I'm not expecting something hyper realistic or hyper detailed, but the textures and lighting just seem a bit off. Again, this is just nitpicking because the character model is pretty important, especially when this character that we're playing as does not really matter. Second, there's a line at the beginning where Sterling talks about checking just how damaged your brain is. It felt like a joke. I wasn't really sure if it was, but it just kind of bugged me, and it really wasn't funny if it was. A lot of dialogue in the earlier parts is almost identical to Portal 1 and 2 to describe the test chambers or testing material. And while I understand this is because Sterling was reading from a script, I think it would have been nice to see him improvise his own stuff, looking at the tests himself. It just felt repetitive since we've already heard the same thing about emancipation grills twice. Next, a lot of momentum-based tests feel incredibly artificial, for a lack of a better term. Many times you fall, it feels like you get a small to decent boost coming out the other portal. Now, I understand why this happens, to make sure players get the required distance, assuming they did the fall at the correct height, but it just feels a lot less natural than the original Portal games, and sometimes the speed at which you exit the portal seems unnecessary for how far you actually need to go. This isn't a huge deal, but for me it was pretty distracting. There's a moment where Sterling points out that you both finally made it to the spire, and then there's another test chamber. It's a moment which you almost feel like you've achieved something, but then it was immediately squashed because the game decided to throw another couple tests at you for no reason, other than to introduce the power activation and deactivation mechanic, which are literally used never again after those tests. Now for the last nitpick, which is kind of something I have for all the Portal mods I've played, uh, but it's why don't any of the cores have voice modifications like autotune or anything? I mean, sure, Wheatley didn't have any sort of voice alteration, but honestly, he was more the exception rather than the rule. The corrupted cores, GLaDOS, the cores in Portal 1, the turrets, the defected turrets, and to a lesser extent the announcer in Portal 2, all had a sort of voice filter or modification, which I really liked and thought that was part of the Portal charm. And it's also just something that I really like in my robot characters. I just kind of wish more mods would use that. Now we're moving on to the final part, and the longest part, as you can probably tell, which is the bad. Which is pretty much the stuff that I don't really like about the mod. First, there's a lot of time wasted walking between tests. I'm not saying that the game has to only consist of tests and go at a breakneck pace the entire time. Obviously, breaks should be there to break up monotony, and I enjoy learning more about Aperture and having environmental world building outside of tests in Portal 1 and 2. But this mod has walking around in excess, often with very minimal portal usage. The second half has these walking sections in abundance, and there is a long section in the beginning where you don't even have a portal gun to get around quicker. Without any interesting visuals, what is the point other than to increase playtime? The first half is almost as egregious, as it takes way longer than the main Portal games to get your dual portal device, meaning you have to continuously walk back and forth between your blue portal and the immovable orange portal. There are also a lot of branching paths that lead off to other rooms which are entirely unnecessary. Sometimes there will be empty rooms that you walk through for just no reason. It also doesn't make sense why there are catwalks leading to observation rooms during test tracks, because that never happens in either of the two Portal games. Many times you'll even find doors that you should be able to enter, but just don't open because whatever. It's so annoying to try every door because you don't know which one is going to work. Another thing of note, during the backroom section in the first half, you are at one point confronted with this giant test chamber out of the blue. And the first time I did this, it was incredibly confusing. And I guess I was pretty tired when I did it, and on my replay, it definitely took less time, but it still felt really difficult, and I still think it's one of the most challenging tests in all the game, and it's just kind of thrown at you in the first half. There's also a chamber where you are venturing up to the spire in the second half of the game, where you have to shoot a cube through a tube into an excursion funnel. Once you get into the funnel, though, you eventually have to drop it. But like 50% of the time, this doesn't work, and the cube falls into the extremely close emancipation grill and gets fried, meaning you have to do the whole process again. And on tests as a whole, this is very much up to personal opinion, but these tests just feel way less fun than the mainline Portal games. Mechanics will show up and then are immediately forgotten about, such as the power activation slash deactivation, the tube funnels, and the laser cubes. They honestly just feel like slightly different mechanics from Portal 2. The vents essentially work like excursion funnels, holding onto objects and transporting them, only they have a fixed direction to send it in. I can't really speak much on the power activation slash deactivation mechanic, because again, only like 2 tests in the whole game use it. If anything, they should have just been removed from the game entirely, as the introduction just made it seem like it was a mechanic that would make tests feel even longer than they already do. There's also a wind turbine mechanic, which I thought was going to be used for tests, but it was only used a couple times for scenarios outside test chambers. The tests themselves just feel like chores more than anything, and this isn't helped by the excessive amount of backtracking which many tests have. Sometimes you'll have to perform some portal maneuver multiple times just to get slightly further towards the end of a test. Tests also feel like chores in a story perspective. In the main 2 Portal games, there was a reason you're doing the tests. They were part of the story. GLaDOS needs you to test because that's all she cares about, and the same thing happens to Wheatley when he takes control. When you go to the old Aperture, the enrichment spheres are vertical, meaning you are continuously making your way up to Wheatley. In this game, you're forced to do tests because something messed up, or the elevator broke down, or some other arbitrary reason. The characters even complain about how you have to go through the long route. And this is on top of the already large amount of pure walking with occasional portals they put in throughout the rest of the game to stretch it out. As a result, the game feels like it's just making you do tests because it's a Portal game, and you do tests in those games. But without a reason to do those tests other than merely progressing through the game, they end up feeling more like they're testing my patience rather than my abilities with the Portal gun. The final boss kind of encapsulate my issues with the test design. The final fight is you pressing a button, which causes an incredibly easy test to teleport into the spire, which you then have to complete in order to get into a room with a bunch of awkwardly placed turrets. You press a button, another test spawns, then you repeat any previous test to get to the new one, and then you repeat that process twice. It is all incredibly simple and does not really require any thought. None of the new mechanics introduced in the game are used, and it all just feels very lackluster. Without any interesting dialogue, there isn't much to take away from it either. Amelia Conley, the female core you find halfway through the game, doesn't really help you either. She says she has an idea, but I don't really know what that idea is. She just kind of hangs around a management rail and shines a light. I guess it was to indicate the test chamber you're supposed to go to, but since the room is already so bright, it just seemed unnecessary. Now for, in my opinion, the weakest part of the game, which I kind of touched on already in my last point, the story. The game starts with you waking up in the relaxation chamber, same as Portal 2. Then you are awoken by a new announcer voice telling you that you are part of the Aperture Science Human Emergency Response Team. After doing a few tests and getting your blue portal gun, you find Sterling, a core who says that he's a facilities manager, reveals to you that the emergency response team was a lie. Before he can let you out of testing and tell you what's going on, though, he has to register you as an official employee. Otherwise, security systems will hunt you or something, I guess. The only person that had a problem with you ever being outside the test chambers in the previous Portal games was GLaDOS herself. But anyway, after that, he explains that he wants to repair Aperture after the central core was destroyed, obviously referring to GLaDOS herself. Otherwise, the facility may collapse, endangering every core and human still in it, as he says. But he needs you to help him, as his plan requires humans to turn on the repair tool. Later on, after adventuring through observation rooms, Sterling gets you an elevator to the surface. Unfortunately, the elevator doesn't take you all the way to the top, so you have to go through a few test chambers to get there. After testing and getting your dual portal device, you and Sterling come upon the Spire, a large tower with a machine capable of instant teleportation, which he says is even more powerful than the portal gun. He reveals to you that he is trying to revive GLaDOS to repair the facility, but since their parts were scattered all over the facility, even though in Portal 2 they seem to all be there in one place, he needs to use teleportation capabilities of the Spire to get them back. Then, after some mishaps, you are teleported down to Old Aperture. However, this part is not as old as the locations from Portal 2, which kind of confused me, as it uses the modern Aperture Laboratories logo. However, it's underground and looks way older than anything at the top. But moving on, from there you get a new portal gun, meet Amelia Conley, who was a human turned core, and you make your way back up to the Spire. After making it into the main chamber, you confront Sterling, and manage to disable the Spire, which results in a large chunk of the structure being teleported to the moon. You then find yourself waking up being dragged into some sort of chamber with other humans in some sort of stasis sleep before the story ends. Okay, let's recap. You meet a core who seems to be friendly, but his purpose becomes more sinister than you first realize, then heading into an older part of the Aperture facilities by some kind of accident, followed by you meeting a new, more genuine character who was previously a human turned into a robot, who helps you return to confront the evil core, and then it turns out this core's history is even more embarrassing than was first assumed, resulting in a climax that ends on the moon. So you might have realized at this point, the story is incredibly similar to Portal 2. Of course, there are some differences between character motivations and origins, but the general outline is nearly identical. The only real differences being that Sterling doesn't really hate you until some time before the end, and Amelia is nice immediately and stays that way throughout. Now, I'm not expecting some incredibly deep and rich story for a fan game, especially with a team this small. And I'm not even saying that I could do a much better story or anything. But with a setting as interesting as Aperture Science, I feel like there was a big opportunity to do a new and fresh story that wasn't just visiting old Aperture again and having to beat the evil core. But instead, it just felt like a watered down Portal 2, which was a shame. The characters themselves aren't really that special either. Sterling is what I like to call just Diet Wheatley. To be completely honest, he ended up being more annoying than anything. The voice acting seemed competent enough, but, and I don't mean to sound rude, this might be just his regular talking voice, but honestly, Sterling's voice was just pretty grating to listen to. And again, Portal 2 had infinitely more resources than this team did, meaning they could get a lot more high-profile professionals and voice actors to work on this game. And I'm not even completely faulting the team on this. I just think it would be better if they took Sterling's voice in a different direction, and hopefully that would have made him more bearable. I think he was the more entertaining one of the two, but the second half made him quickly turn into being more annoying. Also, just a couple more nitpicky stuff. He says that we, as humans, probably refer to the central core as GLaDOS, but I feel like it would be more appropriate for him to say genetic life form and disk operating system, since GLaDOS feels like human slang that he probably wouldn't be very used to, but that's more of a nitpick. Amelia Conley is also not very interesting either. We find out she worked on GLaDOS herself, and we briefly hear her filling in a Cave Johnson type announcer role when we first meet her. But besides her connection to Sterling being a vacuum she created and gave sentience to for whatever reason, there isn't much else to her. She's pretty shocked when she realizes she's been turned into a core, but adjusts almost immediately afterwards. A person turned core can be a cool concept if executed correctly, and now she has a repeat of GLaDOS, but unfortunately that opportunity is completely wasted. There is an essence that GLaDOS and Wheatley had that is missing from her. Again, the voice acting was competent enough, I guess, but there wasn't much to Amelia that I could attach to, and like Sterling, ended up becoming an annoying presence by the end. And another nitpick, she says, "Is my Roomba really trying to kill me?" or something like that. And on top of not really being that funny to me, how does she know what a Roomba is? That just didn't make much sense. The dialogue in general is missing a lot of that charm, intrigue, and passion that the main Portal games have. It sounds like it's trying to be what people think Portal's writing is rather than, what it actually is, if that makes any sense. At one point, Sterling says that the player doesn't need to be so mean to the turrets, questioning why their simulated pain is any less real than yours. It kind of seems like a callback or almost addressing when Wheatley pointed out how they have simulated pain which feels real to them. But also like, what are you supposed to do? Turrets don't care about your pain. They shoot you on sight. And it's not like I'm throwing them to a pit most of the time. You're just knocking them over. I mean, obviously there are moments where you can be pretty cruel to them, but it just kind of seemed like a weird moment that I didn't really get. Most of these characters were clearly attempts at creating charming characters who could fill in the role of our guides as we play through the game, but instead they end up feeling like retreads of characters we already know, but without their charm, interest, or entertaining and fun personality. Another thing is that the stakes and tension were just not there. Now, I don't fault this entirely on the game, especially since it's a prequel and we already know what's going to happen, so it's kind of inevitable there aren't many stakes. There are still opportunities to create investment and tension in stories like this. An example, an example is, bear with me, Red Dead Redemption 2. Now, this is obviously a game way larger and incredibly different in tone and just about everything, which had an enormous team and years of work compared to a Portal 2 fan game. But the point is, and spoiler alert, by the way, it is a prequel that includes a lot of characters that either die or are just not seen in Red Dead Redemption 1. However, those stories are still so interesting that there is still tension in seeing how they end up, and you want to see who makes it out alive and who doesn't. I don't get any of that with Portal Revolution. Even in the final fight, Emilia, who is supposed to be helping you, doesn't seem at all concerned with what's going on and is more interested in commenting on Sterling and expressing her amusement for his past life being her vacuum cleaner. They quip at each other, but in the end it just kind of falls flat. I think they were trying to make Sterling's backstory kind of embarrassing, like Wheatley's, by having him being a vacuum cleaner, as Wheatley was designed to be a moron, but that aspect of Wheatley is important to his character and has an impact on how the story progresses and how he interacts with Chell and GLaDOS. If Sterling was just a normal core, it would make no difference to the overall story. And you might think I'm looking too far into something that isn't too important and is probably just meant to be a joke, but I feel like it can make things like this work within the story. Maybe Sterling is just some sort of cleaning or maintenance core who was just obsessed with repairing and cleaning the facility, coming from his background as a vacuum cleaner where he obviously was designed to clean. This results in him going to the ultimate lengths to repair the facility, ending in him attempting to revive GLaDOS. I'm just throwing out ideas here, and this might be horrible, but the point is I think there should have been a lot more done with these characters, but since their connection to each other is revealed so late, there isn't much that could, or there wasn't as much of an attempt to. Also, in general, the dialogue just isn't as funny as the main Portal games. I mean, okay, so humor is really subjective. So for some others, it might be, but for me, it was at best amusing, and otherwise, it was just light world building or just random conversation that just ended up being annoying since I didn't really enjoy hearing their voices. Some of it is even just ripped straight from the main Portal games, which may or may not have been intentional. For example, Sterling makes an insult towards the player, which he then feels like he has to explain in his belief that you don't understand the joke. To which Emilia replies in a snarky way that we get it. Very similar to another joke in Portal 2. But this one makes more sense because Wheatley is a moron and obviously underestimates you because of his arrogance. And the delivery is also just a lot better. The ending of the game is also extremely abrupt, though I am definitely not the first person to say this. After you press all the buttons in the final fight, the screen fades to white and the credits immediately play. There's a post-credits scene afterwards where Emilia speaks to you as you are dragged into stasis with some other humans. I don't really know what it means, and I don't really get it. I mean, obviously she doesn't return, so I'm not sure if this is setting up like a sequel or something, but to me it just felt awkward. All in all, the story just feels very empty, unimportant, and worst of all, derivative. It has nothing to say as far as I can tell. Portal 2 had a clear theme of the way power corrupts, but I got nothing from this. There's no theme or moral or message to be found within the writing. One more thing I'd like to comment on is the music. Not that it's particularly bad or anything, I think it's pretty neat that they made an original soundtrack for the game, but there are a lot of parts which could have helped with in more music, in fact, for moments of suspense or for ambience. Portal 1 and 2 have incredible soundtracks which alone can set the tone of a location, and I think that was a missed opportunity with this mod. Now, one of the things that made me want to make this video is the amount of people that are calling this Portal 3, and for that I have to thoroughly disagree. The game does not evolve or improve on the mechanics of the previous Portal games in any way that would make it worthy of being a true sequel to Portal 2, and in some ways that's okay. I don't want a Portal 3, but the lack of true identity for this game just makes it feel like an inferior product even as a fan game in my opinion, that definitely need more time playtesting and just probably more writers. That's about all I have to say on Portal Revolution. This was a pretty negative review, but I say this out of love for the Portal franchise. I wanted this mod to be great and see what the hype was all about, but for me personally, it missed the mark in quite a few important ways. Again, this is a free Portal mod, and I have a lot of respect for the developers that spend a lot of time on it. And hey, if this still looks like a fun mod to you, then go ahead and play it. Assuming you haven't played Portal Stories Meloport Reloaded, because I would say you should probably play those first. And I also still need to be reloaded. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel if you haven't already. If you'd like more Portal content, just let me know in the comments. This is pretty different from what I usually do, so let me know if you like these types of videos as well. And of course, thanks for watching.